Hi, welcome. Enjoy the content, subscribe, and turn on notifications.
Caleb Price had always been the kind of man who took commitment seriously. Since he was young, he'd watched the marriages around him and understood that it wasn't just a celebration, it was a real pact. A commitment renewed every day through small gestures and tough decisions. When he met Patricia, he felt like he'd finally found someone who thought the same way. She was sweet, attentive, always with a smile on her face. She laughed at his jokes, listened carefully when he talked about work, and genuinely seemed interested in building something solid with him. That's why, after 2 years of dating, Caleb decided it was time to take the next step. The proposal was carefully planned. Caleb chose a special restaurant, the very same one where they'd had their first date. He reserved a discreet table near the window, where they could see the city lights sparkling in the distance. When he got down on one knee and opened the little box with the ring, Patricia covered her mouth with her hands, her eyes filling with tears, and said yes before he'd even finished his sentence. It was a moment Caleb would carry with him forever, the feeling that he was making the right choice, that this woman would be his partner for life. The following months were filled with intense wedding preparations. Patricia threw herself completely into organizing everything, choosing colors, flowers, music, invitations. Caleb, meanwhile, focused on making sure everything was financially in order. He wanted their honeymoon to be unforgettable, something that would mark the beginning of their life as husband and wife. He researched destinations, compared travel packages, and finally settled on Bali, a paradise full of secluded beaches, ancient temples, and an atmosphere that seemed tailor-made for love. Patricia loved the idea. She said she'd always dreamed of visiting that place, and that it would be even more special with him by her side. The wedding went exactly as they'd planned. Patricia walked down the aisle radiant, wearing a white dress that seemed to float with every step. Standing at the altar, Caleb felt his chest tighten with emotion as he watched her approach. When they exchanged vows, he heard every word she said, promises of love, respect, and fidelity, and he believed them. He believed with every fiber of his being. When the priest declared them husband and wife and they kissed in front of everyone, Caleb was certain this was the start of something extraordinary. Their honeymoon in Bali was everything he'd imagined and more. Their days were filled with quiet walks, swims in crystal-clear waters, and strolls through ancient temples. At night, they dined at seaside restaurants, talked about future plans, and laughed over silly things. Patricia seemed completely present, taking photos, recording videos, saying these were the happiest days of her life. Caleb noticed every detail, the way she held his hand while walking, how she rested her head on his shoulder watching the sunset, the genuine smile that lit up her face with every new discovery. There was absolutely nothing that suggested anything was wrong. When they returned home, Caleb was still floating on cloud 9. He felt fulfilled, complete. He had the woman he loved by his side, a comfortable home, and a stable job. Everything seemed perfectly in place. Patricia also seemed happy. She slipped back into her routine with the same lightness as always, talking about next steps, decorating the house, planning the layout, organizing their trip photos. Watching all this, Caleb felt a deep sense of peace. Finally, he thought, he'd found his place in the world. But then, 2 days after they got back, everything changed. Patricia had gone to work, and Caleb decided to use his day off to get some things in order. He tidied the living room, unpacked the suitcases that were still half open, and started a load of laundry. That's when he noticed Patricia's laptop was on the coffee table, still powered on. She'd forgotten to shut it down before leaving. Caleb didn't think much of it, he just walked over to close it. But when he touched the mouse, the screen lit up. And that's when he saw it. There was a browser tab open, showing a messaging app Caleb had never seen before. Right in the middle of the screen was a recent message, "I miss you. When are we seeing each other?" The sender's name was Ethan. Caleb stood frozen for a few seconds, trying to process what he was seeing. Who was Ethan? Why was someone sending a message like that to his wife? His mind raced, searching for a logical explanation. Maybe it was a coworker, an old friend, someone she hadn't seen in a while. But something inside him whispered that it wasn't that simple. Unable to resist, Caleb clicked into the conversation. What he saw from that point on completely shattered the image he had of the woman he'd just married. Messages, dozens, maybe hundreds of them. Detailed conversations about secret meetings that had happened before the wedding. Plans to meet up again as soon as Patricia got some time alone. In one of the most recent messages, Ethan asked if she was still going through with it, and it was clear it meant the wedding. Patricia had replied, "I have to. It's about stability. But you know it's you I want." Caleb's stomach churned. The words seemed to leap off the screen and stab him one by one. Stability. She'd married him for stability. He was just the provider, the dependable guy, the one who paid the bills and offered security. Meanwhile, Ethan was the desire, the passion, the man she truly wanted. Caleb kept reading, even though each word hurt more than the last. There were messages sent during their honeymoon. During their honeymoon. While he slept beside her, exhausted after a full day exploring Bali, Patricia had stayed awake, sending sensual photos to another man, telling him she missed him, that she couldn't wait to come back. Caleb had to sit down. His legs shook, his heart pounded irregularly, and a wave of nausea washed over him. Everything he'd believed in, everything he'd mentally built around this marriage, crumbled within minutes. He grabbed his phone and, hands trembling, started taking screenshots of every conversation, every message, every photo, every promise exchanged between Patricia and Ethan. He sent them all to himself, making sure he'd have proof of what he'd just seen. Because in that moment, Caleb knew there would be no reconciliation. No forgiveness. This was the end. When he was done, he closed the laptop exactly as he'd found it and sat silently in the living room, waiting. He didn't know how long he stayed there, just staring into space, trying to understand how he'd been so blind. Patricia had always been so convincing, always knew exactly what to say, how to act, when to smile. And he, naive as he was, had believed every gesture, every word. Yes, he felt anger, but more than that, he felt a deep sadness. The sadness of someone who realizes they've been used, manipulated, treated like a disposable piece in a game they didn't even know they were playing. Hours later, Patricia came home. She walked through the door with her usual smile, dropped her bag on the couch, and headed straight to the kitchen, chatting about her workday. Caleb didn't respond. He just sat there, watching. She noticed the silence, frowned, and asked if everything was okay. Caleb stood up, walked over to the coffee table, picked up the laptop, and placed it in front of her. The screen was still on the same tab. Patricia looked, and all the color drained from her face. Her eyes widened, her mouth opened, but no words came out. Caleb broke the silence. His voice was controlled, firm, but heavy with pain he couldn't fully hide. "I miss you. When are we seeing each other?" He repeated the words he'd seen on the screen slowly, as if he wanted each one to echo in the air. "Who is Ethan, Patricia?" She tried to speak, but her words came out jumbled and meaningless. She reached to close the laptop, but Caleb held it in place. "It's too late. I've already seen everything. Every message. Every photo. Every lie." Patricia started crying. She said she could explain, that it wasn't what it looked like, that Ethan was just a friend, that the messages were old, that she hadn't done anything wrong. But Caleb shook his head. "That's a lie. I read the messages from yesterday. From the day before. From during our honeymoon, Patricia. While I was sleeping next to you, you were texting him. Telling him you missed him. That you couldn't wait to get back." She tried to move closer, to touch his arm, but Caleb stepped back. "Don't touch me." He then showed her his phone, with all the screenshots he'd taken. Stability. That's what you said. You married me for stability. I'm just the fool footing the bill while you have fun with someone else. Patricia sobbed, trying to speak through her tears, but Caleb didn't want to hear any more. He grabbed his car keys and headed for the door. Before stepping out, he turned to her one last time. You destroyed everything, Patricia. Everything we built. And you didn't even have the decency to wait until the honeymoon was over. Caleb left the house that night and went straight to a hotel. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to process everything he'd just discovered. The pain was physical. It felt like someone had ripped a piece out of him, leaving a hollow space behind. But at the same time, there was something else, a strange clarity, almost liberating. He knew, with absolute certainty, there was no going back. That marriage had ended before it had even truly begun. The next morning, Caleb called a lawyer. He explained the situation, showed the evidence, and listened carefully to the advice. The lawyer was straightforward. With that proof, Caleb had a solid case for annulment. Patricia had committed emotional fraud, maintaining a parallel relationship throughout their engagement and even after the ceremony. Plus, since the house, the car, and most assets were in Caleb's name, she'd have little or no claim to them. The process would be quick, efficient, and final. Caleb then returned home. Patricia was there, sitting in the living room, her eyes swollen from crying. She tried to speak as soon as she saw him, but he raised his hand, signaling for silence. I've already spoken to a lawyer. The annulment process starts tomorrow. You have today to pack your things and leave. Patricia was stunned. Caleb, please, we can talk. I made a mistake, I know I did, but we can fix this. We just got married. We have a history. Caleb shook his head. A history? What history? The one where you used me? Where you lied to me? Where you pretended to love me just for financial security while keeping another man on the side? She tried to argue, saying she loved them both, that she was confused, that she didn't know what to do. But Caleb had run out of patience. You don't love anyone, Patricia. You only love yourself. And now you'll have to deal with the consequences. He pulled a suitcase from the closet and started throwing her clothes inside. Patricia tried to stop him, but he was relentless. Get out of my way. His voice was cold, leaving no room for negotiation. She realized there was nothing left to do. She grabbed the suitcase, picked up her bag, and walked out without looking back. In the days that followed, Caleb uncovered even more. He spoke with mutual friends, did his own digging, and learned that Ethan was Patricia's co-worker. Their affair had lasted over a year, which meant it began long before the wedding, during their engagement itself. Ethan hadn't even known Patricia was married, she'd hidden that from him too, saying she was just sorting out some personal matters before they got serious. When Caleb found out, he didn't hesitate. He contacted Ethan and told him everything, showed him the proof, the messages, the dates. Ethan was shocked. He said he never imagined Patricia was capable of something like that and wanted nothing more to do with her. With that, Patricia lost everything, the husband, the lover, her reputation. Desperate, she tried to reverse the situation. She called Caleb dozens of times, sent pleading messages begging for another chance, even tried using mutual friends to convince him. But Caleb remained unmoved. He blocked her number, instructed his lawyer not to accept any settlements, and moved forward with the annulment. There was no room for regret. No room for second chances. The process was surprisingly fast. With the evidence Caleb presented, the judge had no doubts. The annulment was granted in less than 2 months. Patricia received nothing. She left that marriage exactly as she'd entered it, with no home, no car, no assets. And most importantly, with no one's trust. The news spread quickly among friends and family. Caleb's family, who had always treated Patricia warmly, was outraged. Her own mother, who had pushed so hard for the wedding to happen, now had to swallow the shame of seeing her daughter exposed as a cheater. Caleb, meanwhile, focused on rebuilding his life. He sold the house they'd shared, he couldn't look at that place anymore without remembering the lies, and bought a new apartment in a different neighborhood. He started going out with friends again, picked up hobbies he'd set aside, and slowly found his peace once more. It wasn't easy. There were nights he woke up in the middle of the night with a hollow ache in his chest, wondering how he'd missed the signs. But over time, he realized it wasn't his fault. Patricia was a professional liar. She knew exactly how to manipulate, how to hide, how to make someone believe they were loved when they were really just being used. Months later, Caleb saw Patricia at a cafe. She was with a friend and looked visibly different. The spark that used to light up her eyes was gone. She seemed tired, faded. When their eyes met, she started to approach him, but Caleb looked away and kept walking. There was nothing left to say. There was no place for her in his life anymore. In that moment, Caleb realized he'd truly moved on. The pain was still there, yes, but it was distant now, like a scar that no longer hurts. He'd learned a valuable lesson: trust isn't something you give freely, and commitment only matters when it's mutual. Patricia had thrown away the chance to have a man who truly loved her, who was ready to build a whole life with her. Now, she was living with the consequences of that choice. Caleb, on the other hand, moved forward, not with anger, not with bitterness, but with the certainty that he deserved better. He deserved someone who valued him, respected him, and understood what a real commitment meant. And he knew that someday, he'd find that person. Until then, he was fine on his own. He'd gotten his dignity back. He'd gotten his peace back. And in the end, that was all that really mattered. Caleb Price's story didn't end with an instant happy ending, but it ended with something even more valuable: the certainty that he'd made the right choice. That he hadn't tolerated betrayal. That he hadn't accepted being treated as a second option. And that by walking away from someone who didn't deserve him, he'd made space for something far better to enter his life. Because in the end, the greatest revenge isn't destroying the one who betrayed you, it's simply moving on, stronger, wiser, and completely free. Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss any updates. See you next time.